I still smell the oil from that afternoon. Thick, sweet, the way it clings to your tongue when the garage door is down and summer sits like a dog on your chest. The radio on the shelf was murmuring a ball game from Cincinnati, a tinny thread of voices, tucked between the hiss of the compressor and the rattle of my socket set. I was 27 and thought my life was a straight road. Fix the Thompson boys' Pontiac, pick up a bucket of fried chicken from Mabel's on Maple Street, call Sarah before bedtime. That was the plan. That was all. Then the sirens came, not screaming but crawling like someone dragging a fork across a plate. The whole town could hear when Sheriff Douglas Reed wanted attention. He wanted it that day. Blue and red strobes danced across the rusted hoods in my lot, and I saw my name stenciled backward in the windshield glare of his cruiser. Will Turner, an ordinary name, a small-town signature. He stepped out like a man walking onto a stage, brim of his hat cutting the sun, sweat darkening the armpits of his tan shirt. Detective Carl Monroe lagged behind him, shoulders slumped, eyes avoiding mine. "Afternoon, Will," Sheriff Reed said, voice smoothed up like he'd practiced it on the way over. "Afternoon," I answered, wiping grease off my palms with the rag I always kept in my back pocket. "If this is about the tow on Route 9, I got the keys inside." Reed didn't smile. He looked past me into the belly of my shop, at the dangling lights and the tool chest and the photograph of Sarah clipped to the calendar. "We need to talk to you." It wasn't a talk. It was a taking. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, the life I'd built, my shop, my name, my little girl's voice floating through the receiver, was scooped up and carried out like scrap metal. They didn't tell me why, not yet, but I saw the way Reed's jaw tightened, and I knew this wasn't about a tow or a ticket, or anything that could be fixed with a wrench. I knew because Emily had promised me I'd be sorry, and she was the kind of woman who kept her promises. "Turn around, Will," Reed said softly, like a lullaby. And when the cuffs bit my wrists, the ball game on the radio cracked into static, like the crowd somewhere far away had stopped breathing. What he whispered in my ear made my knees go weak, and it wasn't the metal at my skin that did it. It was the word. One word, a word meant to bury a man. They walked me out past the open garage door as if I were a trophy buck. Sunlight slapped my face. The air outside had the fried onion smell that floats over our town at lunchtime, and I wanted to ask if I could wash my hands, just to be clean when the whole street stared. But Sheriff Reed kept a firm grip on my elbow, and Detective Monroe hovered at my other side, silent as a fence post. Across the street, old Mrs. Winchell paused mid-watering her peonies, the hose hissing in her shaky hand. "My Lord Will," she mouthed, lips trembling around the words as though they were too big to swallow. Jimmy Collins, the teenage paperboy, stopped his bike with a shoe squeal and leaned in to gawk. You could feel the town gather, the way birds gather on a wire when a storm rolls in. "What's this about?" I said, voice rough with the dust in my throat. My mind flipped through possibilities that made sense to a man like me. Unpaid ticket, a mix-up with a plate, a mistake. A mistake. A mistake. Reed didn't answer, but Monroe finally did. He cleared his throat and said, We're taking you in for questioning." His voice broke on the last word. He couldn't hold my gaze. "For what?" I pushed, half turning, the cuffs clinking like cheap wind chimes. Reed leaned close. "For what you did to your little girl," he said, and the world tilted, the sky folding in like a closing hand. "No." I laughed, an ugly, cracked laugh that didn't sound like me. "No, Sheriff, no, Sarah." "No," he nodded once. The ground fell away. A woman down the block made a sound like she'd swallowed glass. From the corner of my eye, I saw a curtain shift in the duplex where Emily had moved after we split. The curtain breathed. "Someone was there watching." "I didn't," I said. "God, I didn't." The words didn't matter. They were feathers in a thunderstorm. They put me in the back seat. The vinyl was hot enough to burn through denim. My own reflection, smeared and double in the plexiglass, looked like a stranger testing out panic. As we pulled away, I watched my garage door yawning open, tools gleaming like teeth. The radio inside the shop had found the game again, a cheer rising thin and far. I thought of Sarah's milk-tooth smile. I thought of the time she fell and I scooped her up, and Emily laughed and said I was overprotective. Overprotective. Me. At the stop sign, Reed didn't look left or right. He stared ahead, knuckles pale on the wheel. "You should talk now, Will," he said, almost gentle. "Tell us before it gets worse." "I have nothing to say," I answered, because every word felt like stepping into a trap. But silence has a sound. It's the sound of a door slamming and staying shut. And as the cruiser nosed toward the station, a figure stepped off the curb ahead of us, into the sunlight, hand lifting like a blessing or a curse. The figure raised her chin. Emily. The station smelled like coffee left too long on a burner, and the lemon cleaner they slop over sins. A fan clicked overhead, catching on a blade with each revolution. Tick, 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 like a metronome counting down to a song I didn't want to sing. They sat me at a table scarred with names and dates, the kind you carve when you're young and reckless. The kind that says I was here because you're afraid you won't matter otherwise. Monroe set a paper cup in front of me. "Water," he muttered, as if he had to justify the kindness. I stared at the cup. My hands, cuffed in my lap, twitched toward it and then away. Reed stood in the doorway for a moment, shoulders squared, then crossed the room. He placed a manila folder on the table with a care that made my stomach turn. "We spoke to Emily," he said softly. The way he said her name like a hymn told me the rest. "She says Sarah told her. She says Sarah was scared to tell anyone but her." "That's not true," I said, and my voice came out a rasp, strangled by fear. "Sarah falls asleep on my chest every Friday. She draws horses on napkins when I take her for pancakes. I couldn't finish. My throat closed on the picture of her, knees knocking under the diner booth, syrup on her chin. The door swung open. Emily stepped in, flanked by a young deputy I didn't know. She wore a blue dress I recognized, a Sunday dress. Her hair was pinned back too tight, a style she only chose when she was furious enough to pretend she wasn't. She didn't look at me at first. She looked at Reed, and something passed between them, something I couldn't touch. "Emily," I said, and the name tasted like dirt. "Please," she turned at last. Her eyes were glassy, unblinking. "I'm here for Sarah," she said, and every word was a polished stone. "Not for you. Tell them," I begged. "Tell them the truth." Her mouth trembled, then went flat. "The truth is ugly," she said. "But it's still the truth." Monroe shifted, as if he wanted to step between us and didn't know how. Reed slid the folder closer to me. "We'll give you a minute," he said, and ushered Emily to the hall. Through the thin door, their voices braided into a hush I couldn't make out. I stared at the folder. I stared at my hands. My heartbeat filled the room, that broken fan keeping time. When the door opened again, Emily didn't come back in. Reed did, alone, face set like poured concrete. He lowered himself into the chair opposite me and opened the folder. The first page showed a date and a line that carried my name like a stain. Under it, there was a sentence that felt impossible. "Like reading your own obituary, Will," Reed said, voice suddenly tender, as if to a child. "She's willing to testify." The cup of water tipped under my hand, a small flood crawling across the table toward the edge. It dripped off, 1, 2, 3 beads tapping the floor, and I realized there was nothing between me and the drop but air. I lifted my eyes to Reed's, mouth working for breath, and then from the hallway a small voice, too small, rose and said my name. A voice I'd know in a hurricane. "Daddy?" Before the lies, before the cold clang of metal on my wrists, my life was small in the way good lives are small. I had my garage, my 2 hands, my wife, and a daughter who laughed like sunlight through lace curtains. It was enough. It was more than enough. Emily and I met at a church picnic in 1979, back when we were both still figuring out who we wanted to be. She was 20, wearing a yellow dress that caught the wind like it wanted to remember her shape. I was 21, hiding a busted knuckle under a paper plate full of baked beans. She spilled sweet tea on my shirt, apologized in a voice soft as August, and laughed when I told her it made me smell better than my cologne. That was it. That laugh was the start of everything. We married 2 years later in the same church where we met, the choir out of tune and the air thick with lilac and cheap perfume. I remember her father shaking my hand too long, his grip saying what his mouth didn't. "Don't you ever hurt her." I never planned to. We bought a tiny house on Elm Street, white paint already peeling, the front porch leaning left. I fixed cars out of the shed until the bank loan cleared for Turner's garage, and for a while, the town smiled at us like we belonged to it. Sarah was born in the summer of '83. The doctor said she came into the world wide-eyed and silent, looking like she was already trying to figure out who we were. Emily cried when she first held her, And I remember thinking, if this moment could last forever, I'd die right here. Every sound after that, Sarah's first giggle, her baby hiccups, the way she called me Dada with that half laugh at the end, became the rhythm of my days. We weren't rich, but we were something better, simple. Saturday breakfasts, porch swings at dusk, the faint hum of fireflies brushing against the screens. Emily used to hum Patsy Cline while she washed dishes, and sometimes she'd stop mid-song, look at me and whisper, "Promise me we'll always be like this." And I did. I promised. I meant it, but promises are fragile things. They don't break. They rot slowly while you pretend not to smell the decay. One night, years before everything went dark, I saw her standing at the window, long after Sarah was asleep. The light from the street caught her reflection, and for a second she looked like a stranger watching her own house. When I asked what she was thinking, she said nothing. But there was a crack in her voice I didn't understand back then. Now I know. That was the first night Emily started slipping away. The first fight I remember wasn't about anything that mattered. That's how it usually starts. Something small, a spark you don't see as fire yet. I came home late one evening after helping Hank Wilmer tow a car from Route 9. Emily was waiting on the porch. Arms folded, hair pulled tight, eyes like two chips of blue glass. "You said you'd be home by 6, she said. I got caught up. Hank's truck died again. You know how he is. It's always something, isn't it, she said. Always someone else's problem before mine. I laughed, tried to pull her in, but she stiffened, turned her face away. I said softly, "it's just work. You know I'm doing it for us." "For us," she repeated, like she was tasting a foreign word. "Then why do I feel like I'm always alone?" I didn't have an answer for that. And after that night, she stopped waiting on the porch. It wasn't overnight, but little by little, the warmth between us thinned. She started spending more time with her friends from the school where she taught, came home smelling of chalk dust and perfume that wasn't the one I'd given her. She'd talk about a new counselor at work, Mark something, and her voice would soften when she said his name. I'd pretend not to notice, but silence has a way of chewing at the edges of trust. I tried to fix it the only way I knew, by working harder. I brought her flowers. I took Sarah to the park so she could rest. I even repainted the kitchen because she'd once said the yellow was too bright. But every time I turned around, she was slipping further away. The town didn't see it. They saw what we wanted them to see. Emily's polite smile at church, my hand resting on her back, Sarah twirling in her little Sunday dress. People in small towns believe what looks good in photographs. Then came the night she didn't come home until past midnight. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the clock ticking like a dare. When she walked in, her face was pale, lipstick smudged. "Where were you?" I asked. "At school," she said too quickly. "At midnight?" She didn't answer. Just brushed past me and said, "You don't trust me anymore." That was the moment I realized she'd stopped loving me long before she'd ever say it. And worse, she'd already started planning how to make sure I was the villain when she finally left. When Emily asked for the divorce, she did it in that same soft tone she used when reading bedtime stories to Sarah. We were sitting at the kitchen table, steam rising from the coffee we weren't drinking. The morning light cut through the blinds, striping her face in gold and shadow. "I can't do this anymore, Will," she said. "Do what?" I asked, though I already knew. "This." Pretending. The smiles, the church dinners, the neighbors asking how we're doing. I'm tired of living in a picture frame. I wanted to fight, but the look in her eyes told me it was already over. So I nodded, the way a man nods at his own reflection when he's too proud to beg. "If that's what you want," I said. "It's what I need," she whispered. The papers came 2 weeks later. She got the house. I got the garage. Shared custody on paper, though she made sure Sarah spent most nights with her. I didn't argue. I thought time would soften her anger. I thought if I kept my head down, kept loving Sarah, kept being kind, Emily would remember who I was. But kindness is wasted on someone who's already rewriting history. I started hearing whispers around town. Little things. Looks that lingered too long. The mother of one of Sarah's friends stopped waving when I passed by. A neighbor's smile turned brittle. I asked Emily once, after picking up Sarah from her place, "Are you saying something about me?" She looked at me then, really looked at me and smiled. Not kindly, but coldly. People talk, Will. I don't control what they say. But she did. And the way she said it told me she liked the way those rumors sounded in her mouth. I didn't know it yet, but she was setting the stage. Whisper by whisper, she was painting me into a monster. And when the time came, all she'd have to do was point, and the town would already be ready to believe her. One night, when I dropped Sarah off, she clung to my leg and said, "Mommy cries a lot now." I looked past her, saw Emily standing in the doorway, arms folded, expression unreadable. "She's fine, honey," Emily said quickly, pulling Sarah away. I should have known then. Should have seen the fire she was lighting under my feet. But love makes you blind, and guilt makes you stay close to the flame, even as it burns. And so, the next chapter of my life didn't begin with a gavel or a judge. It began with a whisper in the dark. It was a Thursday in March, one of those nights when rain falls sideways and the wind sounds like it's scraping against the world. Sarah was 6. I'd just made her hot chocolate and tucked her under the quilt her grandma had sewn before she passed. She wanted a story, and I remember I picked Charlotte's Web because it always made her giggle. When she started to drift, I turned off the light, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Love you, Peanut." Nothing about that night was wrong. Nothing. The next morning, I took her back to Emily's house on Cedar Lane. Emily barely opened the door. She looked different, tense, eyes red, wearing the robe I'd once bought her on our anniversary. "You could have called before bringing her early," she snapped. "She said she wasn't feeling good," I said. "Didn't want her to miss school." She didn't answer. She pulled Sarah close, too close, like she was afraid I'd snatch her away. When she shut the door, she didn't say goodbye. 2 days later, Sheriff Reed's cruiser rolled up to the garage. He didn't come in right away. Just sat there, engine humming, watching me through the windshield like a man rehearsing a tragedy he didn't want to perform. That was the day the lie began breathing. "Will," he said as I stepped outside, "I need you to come with me." "What's going on?" "It's about Sarah," he said. The way he said her name, low, careful, made something inside me drop. "What about Sarah?" I asked. He hesitated. Emily called. "She says the girl. She told her something. Something about you." For a moment I couldn't hear. The rain had stopped, but it felt like it was still falling, inside my head, behind my ribs. "She's confused," I said quickly. "Kids say things. You know that. Reed wouldn't look at me. We just need to talk. Talk, that word again. Always the same word before they take your life apart." When I sat in that little room later, the one with the flickering fluorescent light and the single chair, I still believed it would get cleared up. I believed in reason, in fairness, in the truth. But truth doesn't stand a chance when it's up against vengeance wrapped in sorrow. Because while I sat there waiting for answers, Emily was already across town, crying into the microphone at the sheriff's office, telling them her ex-husband had hurt their daughter. And that single word, hurt, echoed louder than anything I could ever say. Detective Carl Monroe came in first. He looked older than I remembered, hair thinning, eyes full of pity he tried to hide. He placed a tape recorder on the table and said, "This is just routine, Will. Routine. Like getting your oil changed." "Tell me about Thursday night," he said. "I had Sarah," I said. "We had dinner, I read her a story, she went to sleep, that's it." He nodded slowly. "Did anything unusual happen?" "No." "Did she seem upset?" "No." He clicked his pen. "You sure about that?" Something inside me tightened. "You think I'm lying?" He didn't answer. He reached into his folder, pulled out a photo of Sarah, my Sarah, sitting on a hospital bed, holding a stuffed rabbit I'd bought her. My breath stopped. "What is that?" I asked. "Emily took her to a doctor," he said quietly. "She said Sarah told her you touched her inappropriately." I slammed my fists on the table. "That's a damn lie," Monroe flinched. "Calm down, Will. I just need you to tell me your side." "My side?" I was shaking so hard I could barely breathe. "My side is the truth. I never hurt my little girl. She's all I've got." He studied me for a long time, pen frozen mid-air. Then he sighed. "Look, Will, these things, they're complicated. Sometimes kids get confused, sometimes—" "Don't," I snapped. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." He looked at the mirror behind me, the kind that hides people on the other side. I saw his reflection, small, tired, almost human. "Emily's very convincing," he said softly. "People believe her." That was the moment I realized truth didn't matter. It wasn't about what happened. It was about who could cry the loudest. I told him everything, every detail, but his questions kept circling back, tighter and tighter, like a noose. Every "Are you sure?" sounded like "We already decided." When he finally stood up, he looked sorry. But sorry doesn't save you when the wheels have already started turning. Outside the window, the Kentucky sky was turning the color of bruises. I thought of Sarah's voice, that tiny whisper at the station. Daddy. And it hit me. They'd already taken her away. And Emily. Emily had made sure she'd never look at me the same again. The next morning, the story was everywhere. In a town like ours, gossip spreads faster than wind through cornfields. Local mechanic accused of child abuse. The headline in the Greenfield Gazette might as well have been my tombstone. People I'd known my whole life crossed the street when they saw me. Hank Wilmer fired me from the garage, mumbling something about reputation. At church, Pastor Everett asked me to stay home for a few Sundays, just until things clear up. They never cleared up. I went to Emily's house once, desperate. She was sitting on the porch swing, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "Why, Emily?" I asked, voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" She didn't answer right away. She just stared into her cup like it held the truth she'd buried. Then, without looking at me, she said, "You always thought you were better than me. You always made me feel small. Well, now you know what small feels like." I took a step closer. "You're destroying me. You're destroying Sarah." Her eyes lifted, and for a second, I saw something. Guilt, maybe. Or fear. But then she whispered, "Get off my property, Will," and her hand trembled as she called out for Sarah inside. I walked away that night knowing I'd lost everything that ever made me human. The official charge came 3 weeks later. Sheriff Reed showed up again, this time with 2 deputies. They read me my rights, cuffed me in front of my neighbors, and led me past the same peonies Mrs. Winchell had planted years ago. She stood in her yard, watering can shaking, and whispered, "Oh, Will, what did you do?" "I didn't," I said, but she didn't believe me. No one did. As the cruiser pulled away, I looked back at the house that used to be mine, the porch where Emily and I had danced barefoot one 4th of July. The swing still moved gently in the wind. I could almost hear Sarah's laughter echoing across the yard. Then the car turned the corner, and the sound was gone. And that's how a lie, one whispered, one rehearsed, one believed, took everything I was and turned it into something unrecognizable. That was the day I stopped being Will Turner, husband and father. That was the day I became a monster in everyone else's eyes. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and fear. It's strange how you can still remember a smell after 30 years. The wax on the floors, the stale coffee, the faint perfume of spectators pretending they didn't come to watch a man die. They made me walk through the front doors in cuffs. Public, they said. The people had the right to see justice being done. But it wasn't justice they came for. It was the show. Reporters lined the steps with cameras flashing like lightning bugs on fire. Someone shouted my name. Someone else spat on the ground. I saw a woman holding her child close as if my shadow alone could stain her. Inside, my court-appointed lawyer, Linda Price, waited. She was young, too young, hair tied back too tight, hands trembling over a stack of papers that looked heavier than she was. "Mr. Turner," she said, not meeting my eyes, "we'll do everything we can." "Everything we can?" I asked. "Do you believe me?" She hesitated. That half-second was my verdict, long before the gavel fell. "It doesn't matter what I believe," she said quietly. "It matters what they do." The prosecutor, Adam Keller, was already setting up at his table, pressing his suit, smiling at the reporters. He was the kind of man who built his career on headlines. I remember him glancing at me, the corner of his mouth twitching like he'd already won. When they brought Emily in, the air changed. You could feel it. She wore black, a color that made her look like mourning herself. She didn't look at me. She looked at the jury. 12 strangers who would soon own the rest of my life. Then came the sound that cut deeper than any gavel, the bailiff's call. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harold Benton." Benton walked in slow, heavy, his robe dragging the air down with it. A man who believed in finality, not fairness. When I sat back down, I caught sight of Sarah, tiny and fragile, sitting next to a social worker. Her legs barely reached the floor. She didn't look up once. I wanted to call out her name to tell her daddy's here, but my throat was stone. And then, as the prosecutor began his opening statement, I realized I wasn't there to defend myself. I was there to be erased. The day Emily took the stand, the whole town packed into that courtroom. You could smell rain on the coats, sweat on skin, and something else too, the scent of judgment, sharp and final. Keller led her gently, as if guiding a saint to the altar. "Mrs. Turner," he said, "can you tell the court what your daughter told you?" She nodded, hands folded in her lap, eyes wet in all the right places. "She said she was scared, that her daddy touched her, that she didn't want to go back there." The room went still. Even the air seemed to lean closer. "She's 6, Emily whispered. "She doesn't lie about things like that." Every word landed like a hammer. I wanted to shout, "You're lying, Emily." But Linda squeezed my wrist, warning me to stay quiet. "Let her hang herself," she whispered. But Emily wasn't hanging, she was soaring. Keller nodded gravely. "And did you notice anything unusual before that night?" Emily's lip trembled. "He'd been angry lately," she said softly. "Short-tempered. I thought it was the divorce, but now—" Her voice broke. "Now I think he was hiding something darker." Someone in the crowd gasped. Another whispered, "God help that little girl." I looked at Judge Benton, but his eyes were heavy-lidded, unmoved. He'd seen this play before, and he already knew his lines. When it was our turn, Linda stood. "Mrs. Turner," she said carefully, "you and Mr. Turner had a difficult separation, isn't that right?" "Yes." "And you were upset with him?" Emily blinked slowly. "I was hurt." "But this isn't about me," Linda pressed on. "Isn't it true you once said he'll be sorry one day?" Emily's eyes flickered. "No, but I saw it. That tiny twitch, the telltale spark of memory." The moment she realized, I still remembered every word she'd ever used to wound me. Linda tried to push, but Keller objected, and Benton sustained it before the word revenge could leave her lips. The gavel cracked like a bone. When Emily stepped down, she walked past me without looking. But as she passed, she let one whisper slip through the side of her mouth, quiet enough for only me to hear. "I told you I'd make you sorry." And just like that, I knew I was already buried. The dirt just hadn't been thrown yet. The verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside was clear, cruelly blue, the kind of day that should have belonged to fishing trips and open roads. Not to endings. It took the jury only 4 hours. Long enough for them to eat lunch, short enough to mean I never stood a chance. "William Turner," Judge Benton said, voice flat, eyes somewhere far above me. "You have been found guilty of the charges brought against you." Guilty. The word hung in the air like smoke. I didn't hear the rest. The sentencing. The legal phrases. The cold rhythm of bureaucracy. All I remember is the sound of a sob, my mother's, and the scrape of her chair as she was led out. 30 years to life. That's what they gave me. When the deputies came to cuff me, my knees almost gave out. Emily was still sitting there, hands folded, face perfectly still. For a moment, I thought I saw doubt flicker behind her eyes, but it passed like a shadow under a cloud. They led me past Sarah. She looked up at me then, for the first time in weeks. Her eyes were wide, confused, not hateful, just lost. I tried to smile. My mouth wouldn't move. "Daddy," she whispered. Before I could speak, the social worker pulled her close and the door slammed shut between us. As they walked me down the corridor, flashbulbs burst in my face. A reporter shouted, "Do you have anything to say, Mr. Turner?" I stopped, turned toward him, my voice steady only because it had nowhere else to go. "Yeah," I said. "The truth always comes back, even if it takes a lifetime." They shoved me forward down the stairs into the waiting van. The doors slammed, the locks clicked, and the world, the one I knew, was gone. Outside I saw Emily's reflection in the van's window, her hand over her mouth, tears running down. For a moment, I almost believed they were real. Then the engine started, and she disappeared into the blur. That was the day I stopped counting years. That was the day the prison doors in my mind closed, long before the real ones did. The first sound I remember inside that place was metal. Not just one door, but layers of them. Gates within gates, slamming shut in rhythm, each one stealing another piece of who I used to be. The air smelled of bleach and sweat, thick enough to taste. You could hear shouting somewhere down the hall. Laughter, too. The kind that doesn't mean joy. When the transport van stopped, the guard opened the door and said, "Welcome to Green River Correctional." "Turner?" His voice was flat, practiced. I stepped out, my wrists cuffed, ankles chained, eyes blinking against the fluorescent light that made everything look sickly green. They led me through intake like I was livestock. Name, birth date, sentence, number. I became 40751. That day, the state's version of me. "You can forget your name now," one of the officers said, smirking as he shoved a stack of clothes into my chest. Orange jumpsuit, 2 pairs of socks, 1 blanket thin as paper. Hands on the wall, the search was the worst part. It wasn't pain, it was humiliation. They stripped me bare, made me squat, cough, turn. The room was cold, the floor colder. I remember the guard's breath, coffee and tobacco, and whispering, "You get used to it, but you don't, you never do." When they finally led me to my cell, it was already dark outside. The concrete walls sweated moisture. The door clanged shut behind me, and the sound echoed like it wanted to last forever. Inside was 1 bunk, 1 toilet, 1 small window too high to reach. A man sat on the lower bed reading a Bible with 1 eye. The other was a milky grey. He looked up, nodded once. "You're the new guy," he said. "Yeah," I managed. "Will Turner." He smiled, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Ray Collins." "Been here a while." "How long?" He shrugged. "Long enough to stop counting." I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the top bunk, the mattress thin and lumpy, listening to the chorus of voices through the walls. Men coughing, crying, laughing like broken machinery. Every hour, a door slammed somewhere and I'd jolt awake thinking I was back in court. Ray hummed an old blues tune below me, low and steady, like a lullaby for ghosts. When he stopped, he said quietly, "Don't let 'em see you scared, Turner. Fear's blood in the water here." I didn't answer. I just stared at the ceiling until the dark turned grey and morning came like a punishment. They wake you before dawn in Green River. The lights snap on without warning, and the guards bang on bars with batons. "Up, chow time." I followed the line through the corridor, feet shuffling on concrete. The smell of bleach replaced by something worse, burnt eggs and despair. The mess hall was a roaring echo of voices and metal trays clattering. I sat alone, staring at the grey lump on my plate that was supposed to be oatmeal. That's when it happened. My first test. A man with tattoos crawling up his neck sat across from me. He grinned without warmth. "You the child molester?" It wasn't a question, I froze. The word hit harder than any fist. "Name's Snake," he said, tapping his fork on the table. "You don't belong here. Men like you don't last." Before I could answer, Ray appeared behind him. "Leave him be," he said, voice low but carrying weight. Snake laughed. "Old man, this ain't your business." "It is now." Ray didn't blink. His good eye stared straight into Snake's, cold as steel. The table went quiet around us, the air tight with danger. Then Snake spat on the floor, muttered something and walked away. Ray sat down across from me. "Don't thank me," he said. "You just owe me now." I nodded, still shaking. "Why'd you help me?" He spooned the grey mush without looking up. "You looked like you needed someone who ain't gonna knife you in your sleep. That day, I learned the first rule of prison. There's no mercy, only alliances." Later, during yard time, I stood by the fence and looked up at the sky, pale, washed out. The same sky Sarah might have been looking at wherever she was. I tried to picture her face, but it kept blurring with Emily's, and my chest felt like it was caving in. When the bell rang to go back inside, Officer Kyle Davis, a young guard who couldn't have been more than 25, paused beside me. "You keeping your head down, Turner?" he asked quietly. "Trying." "Do more than try," he said. "They smell weakness faster than blood." It was strange, his tone wasn't cruel, almost warning, like he'd seen men drown here before. That night, as I lay in the dark, I heard a fight down the hall. Metal, bone, screaming. Someone shouted for help, then silence. Ray exhaled slowly below me. "Welcome to hell, Turner," he murmured. "First night's always the longest." He was right. It stretched on forever. Weeks passed, but that first night never really ended. The walls never stopped closing in. Days blended. Work detail, chow head count, lights out. You start forgetting the sound of your own name, the smell of rain, the meaning of Sunday. The letters from my mother came at first. Short, trembling handwriting. We're praying for you, Will. Sarah's growing so fast. Keep your faith. Then they stopped. No explanation. Just stopped. One afternoon, while mopping the corridor, I caught my reflection in the metal door. Hollow eyes, beard rough, skin sallow. I barely recognized the man staring back. Later that night I sat on the lower bunk, while Ray fixed a small cross out of matchsticks. "You believe in God, Turner?" he asked without looking up. "I used to." He grinned, teeth yellow under the dim light. "He don't care if you do or not. He's here anyway." In the cracks. In the waiting. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe there was meaning in the ruin. But all I could see was Sarah's face, 6 years old forever in my memory. Then something small happened. During mail call, a guard handed me an envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a drawing, crayon, a horse crooked and smiling with the words "for Daddy" written in pink. I don't know how it reached me. I don't know if Emily even knew. But I pressed that drawing against my chest and wept so hard Ray had to turn away. It was the first time in months I felt human again. That night, the lights flickered out for a few seconds, a blackout. The whole block held its breath. In that brief dark, I whispered, "I didn't do it," to the ceiling, to God, to whoever might still be listening, and from below Ray's voice came, steady and sure. "Then don't let this place make you into the man they think you are." It was the closest thing to hope I'd had since the cuffs clicked shut. But hope in prison is a dangerous thing. It keeps you alive, but it also reminds you just how much you've lost. And that night, as the lights came back on, I realized the man who walked into Green River Correctional had already died. What was left was someone else entirely. There's no real sense of years in prison. Time doesn't move, it drips. Slow, heavy, corrosive. You measure it not by calendars, but by who's still alive, by who disappears, by which guard stops calling you Turner and starts calling you old man. By the end of my 5th year, I'd learned the rhythms of survival. Wake up before the lights, wash your face in cold water, keep your back to the wall at chow, never eat the eggs, and never ever show weakness. The body adapts, the soul, not so much. Ray Collins became my anchor in that storm. He'd been in for 2 decades already. Armed robbery gone wrong. "I ain't proud," he used to say, "but at least I did what they said I did." That's more than most in here. We worked together in the machine shop, hands raw from metal shavings, the air thick with oil and despair. I'd fix broken equipment just to feel useful again. One day Ray handed me a rusted wrench and said, "You still got purpose, Will. You fix things. Maybe one day you fix yourself." But the longer I stayed, the harder it was to remember who myself even was. Letters stopped coming. My mother passed in '98. The chaplain, Pastor John Everett, told me after Sunday service. He said it gently, with the soft, practiced tone of a man who's broken too many hearts in this place. "She went peaceful, son," he said. That night I sat on my bunk and stared at the wall until it blurred. I wanted to cry, but tears felt like a language I'd forgotten. Weeks later, Pastor Everett left a small Bible on my bunk. No note, just underlined verses in red. I didn't read it for a long time. When I finally did, I wasn't looking for God. I was looking for my mother's handwriting in those underlines. Every year the world outside grew less real. They brought in new inmates, young ones with tattoos on their necks and smartphones in their stories. The world had changed. Music, language, even the way people walked. And I was frozen, stuck in 1989. Sometimes I'd whisper Sarah's name before I fell asleep. Just her name. A quiet ritual for a ghost I didn't know was still alive. In that silence, I started to understand what real punishment was. Not the bars, not the chains, but the forgetting. The slow death of memory. It must have been around my 12th year when the world outside officially stopped trying to remember me. No letters, no visitors. My daughter would have been 18 by then. I used to picture her walking across a graduation stage, looking out into the crowd, searching for a father who wasn't there. I tried to keep her alive through drawings. I sketched on scraps of paper I found, rough outlines of horses, of the old garage, of a little girl with pigtails. Ray would tease me. "You're turning into Picasso, old man," he'd say. But when he caught me hiding one of those sketches in my Bible, he'd nod quietly and add, "Keep her close." The world out there don't deserve to have her if it's what took you from her. He was my brother in everything but blood. When the fights broke out, he'd step in front of me. When the loneliness got too loud, he'd start humming. But in 2003, Ray collapsed in the yard. Heart just gave out mid-jog. I held his head in my lap while the guards shouted for medical. His lips moved, faint, dry. "You'll get out, Will, you hear me? You'll walk out." He died before the medics arrived. They buried him behind the walls, a wooden cross with his number instead of a name. I stood there after the service, wind, cold and dry, and thought, this place doesn't just hold men, it eats them. After that, I stopped talking much. Days passed wordless. The chaplain called it spiritual stillness. I called it what it was, hollow. One winter morning, Officer Kyle Davis brought me mail. Just one envelope. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping from the Louisville Herald. An obituary. Emily Turner. My breath caught. She died of cancer at 48. I didn't know whether to hate or mourn her. I sat there for hours staring at her photo. She still looked young in it. Still looked sure. For the first time in decades, I whispered her name without anger. Emily. And then, for reasons I couldn't explain, I whispered, I forgive you. But forgiveness in a cell doesn't echo. It just falls flat on the concrete and disappears. By my 20th year, I was an old-timer. The new inmates called me Pops. Some even asked me for advice. Funny how a man accused of the worst thing imaginable becomes a counselor once everyone's seen he can survive the years. Officer Davis got promoted around then. He'd still stop by, slip me extra soap or a cup of coffee. You've kept your head down, Turner, he said once. Never caused trouble. I had enough trouble before I came here, I told him. He studied me a moment. You still say you didn't do it? I nodded. He exhaled through his nose. Then maybe one day someone ought to listen. It was the first time anyone in 2 decades had said something that sounded like belief. Then came a strange twist of fate. The prison got a new warden, younger, strict but fair. He allowed a volunteer literacy program. I signed up to tutor inmates who couldn't read. For the first time in years, I felt useful. My hands, once stained with oil, now turned pages instead of bolts. During one class, a man named Luis handed me an old magazine article he'd found in the library. "Ain't this you, man?" he asked. It was a piece from a forgotten newspaper written by a journalist named Ellen Hart, revisiting controversial convictions from the late 80s. My name was one of them. The article was small, almost careless, but it lit a spark inside me I thought had died. Someone still knew. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Ray's last words. "You'll walk out." Maybe he'd been wrong about everything else. But not that. Somewhere the truth was still alive and awaiting, buried deep under dust and time, and as the years kept dripping, slow and merciless, I started to believe again, not in God, not in justice, but in the idea that lies can't live forever. It began, like most miracles do, in silence. By then I'd been inside for 26 years. My hair was white, my hands shook, and my reflection looked like my father's ghost. I'd given up on letters, on visits, even on dreams. But one Monday morning, the guard slid an envelope under my cell door. I almost didn't open it. Inside was a single page, typewritten. "Mr. Turner, my name is Ellen Hart. I'm a journalist with the Louisville Herald. I'm revisiting wrongful conviction cases from the 1980s. Yours caught my attention. If you're willing to talk, I'll come see you." I read it 3 times, not trusting my own eyes. Nobody had said my name out loud in years, unless it was followed by inmate or number. When she came a week later, I almost didn't recognize her as the kind of person who'd belong in a prison visiting room. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, no makeup, not pretending to be polite. She sat across from me, tape recorder in hand. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I've read your transcripts. There are gaps." I let out a dry laugh. "You mean the parts where I stopped being human?" She didn't smile. "No, I mean missing evidence. Reports that were never entered. Witnesses who were never called. A neighbor named Martha Jenkins. She gave a statement that vanished from the record. That name hit me like a bell. "Martha," I said. "She lived across from Emily. She saw me drop Sarah off that morning." Ellen nodded slowly. "She says she tried to testify. The prosecution never called her. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Why now?" I asked. "Why look at this after all these years?" She met my eyes. Because truth doesn't expire, Mr. Turner. It just waits for someone stubborn enough to dig it up. Something flickered in me then, hope, fragile and almost painful. For the first time in 3 decades, I thought maybe the walls weren't forever. When the guards called time, she stood and said, "I'll be back." Most people who said that never were. But Ellen Hart, she wasn't most people. 2 months later, Ellen returned. This time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man in his 70s, shoulders stooped but eyes alert. Detective Carl Monroe. I hadn't seen him since the day he'd questioned me in 1989. He looked at me through the glass partition for a long moment, before saying, "You remember me, Turner?" "How could I forget?" he sighed. "I should have done more." Ellen glanced at him, then at me. "Detective Monroe reached out after I published a small piece about your case. He says there's something he needs to show you." Monroe slid a folder across the table. It was old, the edges yellowed, the cover stamped closed case. Inside were photocopies of police notes, typed reports, and one single-page statement. Martha Jenkins, witness. Her handwriting was neat, careful. She'd written that she saw me drop Sarah off at Emily's door the morning after the alleged incident. Child appeared happy and unafraid, it said. No visible distress. I felt the air leave my chest. This would have cleared me," I whispered. Monroe nodded, face grim. "It was buried. Someone didn't want it in court." "Who?" I asked. He hesitated. "Best I can tell. The prosecutor, Keller, said it was unreliable, but I never signed off on the omission. That file was supposed to stay in evidence." Ellen leaned forward. "We can still use this. If the report was intentionally withheld, it's a violation of due process." 30 years too late, I muttered. "Not too late," she said firmly. "Just buried." Monroe rubbed his temples. "I can't undo what I did or didn't do, but I can help you now. There's another man you need to meet. A retired forensic analyst, Dr. Michael Shaw. He was part of the original investigation. Says there's something wrong with the physical evidence, too." "Wrong?" Monroe nodded. "Wrong enough that you might not be the only one who's been living a lie." When they left, I sat staring at the folder long after the guards came to collect it. My hands shook so hard I thought the paper might tear. After 3 decades, the truth had finally spoken, and it sounded like a whisper from the grave. The weeks that followed were a blur of movement, meetings, phone calls, legal forms. After so many years of silence, noise came back into my life. Ellen kept her promise. She met with lawyers, filed public records requests, pushed for access to the old forensic kits from my case. Each time she visited, she'd bring me updates. "Dr. Shaw's reviewing the DNA chain of custody," she said one afternoon. "He says something's off." "What do you mean, off?" "The samples. There's no proper record of who handled them between March 10th and March 13th. That's when the supposed evidence was tested. Shaw thinks they were contaminated or switched." I stared at her, trying to comprehend. 30 years, 30 birthdays, 30 Christmases, 30 missed chances, and it all came down to a botched test and a buried witness. "Why?" I asked. "Why would they do that?" Ellen's voice hardened. "Because Keller was running for district attorney that year. He needed a conviction. You were convenient. Convenient." That word cut deeper than guilty. A few weeks later, Pastor Everett came to my cell. "I hear you've got someone fighting for you," he said, smiling faintly. "Maybe it's time you start fighting too." That night I wrote Ellen a letter, short, shaky handwriting. "I don't know if I believe in God, but I believe in you. Whatever you need from me, I'll give it," she wrote back. "Then let's reopen the wound." I knew what that meant. More hearings, more humiliation, more ghosts dragged into the light. But this time I wasn't running from them. Because for the first time since 1989, the world had stopped calling me a monster, and maybe, just maybe, it was ready to listen. It's strange how the truth doesn't roar when it returns. It crawls, slow, careful, scared of being crushed again. Ellen's letters became my lifeline. Each one smelled faintly of ink and coffee, like the outside world I'd almost forgotten. She wrote about court requests, missing documents, and late-night calls to retired officers who wanted to forget the past. But she didn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Then came the letter that made my hands tremble. "Will, Dr. Shaw confirmed it. The evidence against you was falsified." I read it 3 times, lips moving silently. Falsified. The word didn't feel real. A week later, I met Ellen and Dr. Shaw in the visiting room. Shaw was in his 60s, with white hair and eyes that didn't flinch. He set a folder on the table between us. "Your DNA," he said, tapping it, "never matched what they claimed it did." The test results were altered. Someone copied and replaced the report. "Replaced?" I asked. He nodded grimly. "The sample that convicted you wasn't yours, Mr. Turner. The original data disappeared after Keller's office submitted their official copy." Ellen leaned forward, voice steady but fierce. "We have proof now. The chain of custody was broken. The evidence was corrupted, and the only people who had access to it were Keller's team." I stared at them both. My chest felt tight, my mouth dry. "You're telling me this whole thing, 30 years, was based on a lie that someone wrote down?" Ellen nodded slowly. "And others let it live." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The hum of the fluorescent lights above us sounded like a slow heartbeat. I thought of all the years, all the birthdays missed, all the prayers I'd whispered into concrete. Shaw slid the folder toward me. "It's yours," he said softly. "The truth should belong to the man it was stolen from." When they left, I held that folder to my chest like scripture. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just kept whispering one word over and over. Not innocent, not free, just real, because for the first time in 30 years, I felt real again. Freedom, I learned, isn't a door you walk through. Here's a wall you have to dig out of, inch by inch. Ellen filed for an official review of my conviction. It should have been simple. Evidence tampering, missing witness, prosecutorial misconduct. But nothing in Kentucky's courts ever moves simple for men like me. Keller was retired by then, living comfortably in Lexington, still called Judge Keller by people who'd forgotten what he did to become one. When Ellen contacted him for comment, he denied everything. The case was solid, he told reporters. Turner confessed by omission. Confessed by omission. The lie never stopped evolving. Detective Monroe testified in a preliminary hearing, his hands trembling as he held the old files. The Jenkins statement was real, he said. It went missing from the evidence room right before trial. I can't tell you how, but I can tell you this man didn't get a fair one. The courtroom was different this time. No crowds, no cameras, just a few lawyers, a judge, and the echo of old ghosts. I sat there in my faded jumpsuit, grey hair slicked back, my hands folded. Ellen sat beside me, whispering updates when I lost track. When the state's attorney tried to discredit Dr. Shaw, he didn't raise his voice. "I'm not here to argue," Shaw said. "I'm here to tell you what the numbers say. Can I say this man was framed?" For the first time someone said it out loud. The judge, Margaret Holloway, took her time. Days turned into weeks. Each night I lay awake, staring at the same ceiling I'd been watching for 3 decades. Every sound of keys, every footstep in the corridor. I thought it might be the one that came for me. Then one morning Officer Davis came to my cell. He wasn't smiling, but there was something different in his face. He handed me an envelope. "Judge Holloway's ruling," he said quietly. My hands shook as I opened it. The words blurred through tears I hadn't felt in years. Conviction vacated pending retrial. Defendant released on time served. Time served. 30 years for a lie. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just sat there, paper trembling between my fingers, whispering Ray's name like a prayer. He'd been right, I was walking out. The day they told me to pack up, I didn't know what to take. Everything I owned fit in a small box. A toothbrush, a tattered Bible, and Sarah's drawing of the horse. I held that one the longest. Pastor Everett came to see me before I left. He smiled, his eyes damp. "You got your miracle, Will." I shook my head. "No, Pastor. Miracles don't take 30 years. He patted my shoulder. "Sometimes they do." When I stepped outside, the sunlight hit my face like a slap. It was brighter than I remembered, sharper. The air smelled of grass, not metal. I blinked hard, half expecting to wake up back in my cell. Ellen was waiting by her car. She smiled, a real smile this time, and said, "You're free, Mr. Turner." I looked at her, at the open sky behind her, and said, "I don't even know what that means anymore." We drove in silence for a while. The world outside blurred past. Neon signs, cars that looked like spaceships, people walking with phones glued to their faces. Everything was faster, louder. I felt like a ghost riding through a world that forgot it buried me. At a red light, Ellen glanced at me. "You okay?" I smiled faintly. "I've been in a box for 3 decades. I'll need a minute." She nodded. Take as long as you need. But when we passed the faded sign that said Welcome to Greenfield, my stomach turned. The streets were the same, but smaller. The trees shorter, the houses older. 30 years had passed and the town hadn't changed at all. Only I had. The first night out, I couldn't sleep. Ellen had arranged a small room for me at a halfway house on the edge of Louisville. Plain, clean, and quiet. Too quiet. The bed felt too soft. The air too still. I kept expecting someone to shout "lights out" or a door to slam, reminding me where I belonged. Freedom didn't feel like freedom. It felt like noise I didn't know how to live in. When I stepped outside the next morning, everything moved too fast. Cars whispered by without sound, everyone staring down at glowing screens in their hands. Even the sun felt different, brighter but colder somehow. I went to a diner for breakfast, the kind with neon lights and coffee that smells like burnt sugar. The waitress called me Hon, but when I looked up, she flinched, maybe at my age, maybe at the newspaper still running my story. Wrongfully convicted man released after 30 years. They printed my mugshot next to it. I ate in silence, hands trembling around the cup. Later that day, Ellen drove me to the courthouse to meet my new lawyer, Samuel Grant. Tall, calm, the kind of man who listens before he speaks. "Mr. Turner," he said, shaking my hand, "we're not done. We'll clear your record, not just your sentence." "Does that mean I get my name back?" I asked. He nodded, though his eyes said it wouldn't be easy. "We'll try." That word, try, followed me everywhere. Try to adjust, try to reconnect, try to forgive. But I didn't want to try. I wanted back the years, the birthdays, the sound of my daughter's laughter. And I knew I'd never get them. Still, when Grant slid the papers toward me and said, "We're filing for exoneration, and for the state to acknowledge the misconduct," I signed them without hesitation. I'd lost everything else. My name was the one thing left worth fighting for. Stepping back into court after 30 years felt like stepping into a photograph that never aged. The wood was the same shade of sorrow. The air still carried that sterile, polished smell. But the faces were new, except one. In the back row sat Adam Keller, older now, his hair white, his hands clasped tight. He wasn't smiling anymore. I didn't look away. Neither did he. Judge Holloway presided again, sharp-eyed, patient. Samuel Grant stood beside me, stacks of evidence spread before him. Helen sat 2 rows behind, notebook ready. "Your Honor," Grant began, "we are not merely asking for a vacated sentence. We are asking for the full exoneration of William Turner, a man imprisoned for 30 years on falsified evidence, suppressed testimony, and prosecutorial misconduct." Keller shifted in his seat. Grant presented everything: Dr. Shaw's forensic report, Martha Jenkins's missing statement, Detective Monroe's confession. Each piece felt like a stone being lifted from my chest. When the judge invited Keller to speak, the room went silent. He rose slowly, voice gravelly. "I did what I thought was right," he said. "The evidence at the time was false," Grant cut in. "And you knew it." Keller's jaw worked, but no sound came. His silence was louder than any confession. When Judge Holloway read her ruling, my legs almost gave out. "This court finds William Turner to have been wrongfully convicted. The judgment is hereby vacated and the record expunged. The state of Kentucky acknowledges the miscarriage of justice and extends its formal apology." Formal apology. 2 words too small for 30 years. But still, I was free and innocent. The courtroom didn't cheer. It was quiet, reverent. Ellen was crying softly. Grant squeezed my shoulder. And Keller. Keller just sat there staring at the floor. On the way out, reporters swarmed the steps, microphones like a forest of metal snakes. "Mr. Turner! Mr. Turner! How does it feel to be free?" I stopped, looked straight into the cameras and said, "It doesn't feel like freedom when you've lost everything it was supposed to give you." Then I walked away, leaving the noise behind. In the weeks that followed, my story was everywhere. TV, radio, even podcasts. People said my name with sympathy now, but it didn't sound any better than when they said it with disgust. They called me the innocent man. But innocence doesn't erase time. It doesn't bring back what's gone. One afternoon, Ellen brought news that hit harder than I expected. "The state's attorney is pressing charges against Keller," she said. "Perjury, evidence tampering, obstruction. He could face prison." I sat there for a long time before answering. "So he'll lose years too," she hesitated. "Do you want that?" I thought about it. About revenge, about justice, about everything the word sorry could never fix. No, I said quietly. I want him to know what silence feels like. What it's like when no one believes you. Ellen nodded slowly. Maybe that's worse. After she left, I walked down to the river alone. The sunset burned orange across the water, the same color as the jumpsuit I'd worn for 3 decades. I watched it fade, slow and soft, until the sky went dark. That night I took the folder Ellen had given me, the one with the truth, and set it on my nightstand. I didn't need to read it again. I knew every word. Freedom was no longer about walking out. It was about learning how to live with what walked out with me. The ghosts, the rage, the years that didn't come back. The battle for my name was over. But the battle for myself had just begun. And somewhere out there, my daughter still had to hear the truth from me. Not from papers, not from strangers. From the father she thought she'd lost. You think you'll walk out of prison with music in your head. You think the gates will open, and the air will rush in like mercy. But it isn't like that. Fear's quiet, heavy, almost cruel. The morning they told me I was free, the sun hadn't even risen yet. The sky over Green River Correctional was the color of wet ash. A guard handed me a brown paper bag, my belongings from 30 years ago, a wallet with $6, a rusted key to my old garage, a wedding ring I hadn't worn since the day Emily lied in court. Sign here, the officer said, sliding a clipboard toward me. My hand trembled as I wrote my name. The letters looked strange, foreign, like they belonged to someone else. They gave me new clothes. Cheap jeans, a grey shirt, plastic shoes, the kind that squeak when you walk. When the gates opened, the sound was slow, grinding, mechanical. It didn't sound like freedom. It sounded like a machine groaning under its own weight. Ellen was waiting by her car outside. Her eyes were red, but she smiled like someone who'd just seen a ghost come back to life. You ready? She asked. I've been ready for 30 years, I said, but the truth was I wasn't. The world outside hit me like a wave. Cars that made no noise. People talking into thin air with small lights in their ears. Billboards with faces I didn't recognize. Everything moved too fast. I wanted to fall to my knees and kiss the ground. I wanted to run. I wanted to cry. Instead, I just stood there, frozen, staring at the open road, afraid it might vanish if I blinked. When Ellen put a hand on my shoulder, I flinched. Then, slowly, I breathed. For the first time in 3 decades, the air wasn't recycled through vents or soaked in bleach. It smelled like rain, and for that one breath, I believed maybe I could live again. Ellen drove us back to Greenfield that afternoon. 30 years hadn't changed it much. The diner was still there. The gas station still sold the same brand of coffee, but everything felt smaller, quieter, like the whole town had aged without me. When we turned onto Elm Street, my chest tightened. The house was gone, torn down, replaced by a modern duplex. No porch swing, no laughter. No trace of the life I lost. Do you want to stop? Ellen asked gently. I shook my head. No, let the ghosts rest. We parked near the old church where I'd married Emily, the same bell tower, the same white paint. I sat there staring at the doors, remembering the day she'd walked down the aisle, sunlight spilling on her face like a promise. Now the promise was dust. I found out something, Ellen said softly. Your daughter, Sarah, she lives in Ohio now. She's a nurse, married, 2 kids. The words hit me harder than any verdict. My daughter, my little girl, does she know I'm out? I asked. Ellen hesitated. She does. I reached out. She read the reports, the ruling. She said, she needs time. I nodded slowly. She deserves that. We sat in silence for a long time. The afternoon light stretched long across the street, painting everything gold. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt hollow. Do you ever think it was worth it? I asked quietly. Ellen frowned. Worth it? The truth. After all this time, she looked at me, eyes sharp with conviction. It's always worth it. Even when it comes too late. Maybe she was right. But as I stared at the church doors, I couldn't help thinking, as the truth may set you free, but it doesn't take you home. That night, Ellen dropped me off at a small apartment near the river, donated by a local church. It's not much, she said, handing me the keys, but it's yours. The word yours felt strange in my mouth when I whispered it back. I hadn't owned anything in decades. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and emptiness. There was 1 bed, 1 chair, 1 lamp. I placed the paper bag on the table and took out my wedding ring. It looked smaller than I remembered. I turned it in my hand under the weak yellow light. Outside, the city hummed, a siren far away, laughter from the next building. The world was alive and I didn't know how to join it. I made coffee in the small pot Ellen had left for me. When it started to boil, I closed my eyes. The sound reminded me of the radio in my old garage, the day the sirens came. 30 years had passed, and the sound still found me. I sat by the window, sipping the bitter coffee, watching the streetlights flicker on. A man walked by with a child on his shoulders, both of them laughing. The sight hit me like a punch. I pressed Sarah's drawing of that little crayon horse against the glass. It had survived the years, yellowed and fragile, but still smiling. "Tomorrow," I whispered to it. "Tomorrow I'll find her." Then I turned off the light and let the dark come in, not as a threat, but as an old friend, because that night, for the first time since 1989, there were no bars. No locks, only silence. And somehow silence was louder than freedom. It took me 3 weeks to gather the courage to see her. 3 weeks of walking the city, watching fathers lift children into cars, mothers holding hands that once belonged to someone like me. I had rehearsed what I'd say 100 times, but the truth doesn't fit neatly into words, especially when it's 30 years late. Ellen drove me to Ohio. The ride was quiet. The fields passed by in long golden waves, and I thought about every mile that had stretched between Sarah and me since that morning in 1989. "She said she'd see you," Ellen whispered, as we pulled up in front of a small white house with a red mailbox. "She didn't promise much, but she said she'd open the door." I nodded, staring at the house that wasn't mine but held the person who still was. My legs felt heavy when I stepped out of the car. My palms were slick with sweat. The front yard was scattered with toys, a tricycle, a basketball, a chalk drawing on the sidewalk that read, "Welcome home, Daddy," in a child's handwriting. The irony hit hard. Ellen stayed by the car as I climbed the porch steps. My heart was pounding like the first day they cuffed me. I knocked once, for a moment, nothing. Then the door opened. She stood there, Sarah. She was 36 now, taller than her mother, hair a soft brown, eyes the same blue I'd seen the day she was born. For a second I saw the little girl she used to be, and then it vanished, replaced by a woman whose face carried both love and wariness. "Hi." "Sarah," I said, my voice breaking on her name. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, eyes searching, trembling. You look older," she said finally. I smiled faintly. "I guess 30 years'll do that." She swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." "Me neither," I admitted. "But I've been waiting my whole life to hear your voice again." Something shifted in her face. Pain, disbelief, maybe forgiveness trying to find its way through. She stepped aside. "You'd better come in." Her home smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Family photos lined the hallway. Her wedding day, 2 small children, a man with kind eyes standing beside her. It felt like walking into a life I'd been erased from. I sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded, while she poured coffee into 2 mugs. I could see her hands shaking. "I don't really know how this works," she said, setting the cup in front of me. "Neither do I said quietly. "They don't teach you how to talk to your daughter after 3 decades. She smiled, a sad little curve. "Mom always said you hurt me. For years I believed it. I remembered things I guess weren't real." I felt my chest tighten. "That wasn't your fault, sweetheart. You were a child. You believed the people you trusted." She looked at me, tears in her eyes. "I hated you for so long, Dad." "I know," I whispered. "And I never hated you back." Silence hung between us, thick, fragile, sacred. She wiped her face and reached for something on the coffee table, an old, folded paper. She handed it to me. "I kept this. Found it in Mom's things after she died. It was the crayon drawing, the same one that had lived in my cell all those years. Only this one was brighter, untouched by time. I made 2, she said, smiling through her tears. I didn't know why. Maybe I thought you'd somehow see it." I traced the crooked horse with my finger. "I did, baby." "I did." She sat beside me then, close but careful, like the air between us might still explode. "Do you hate her?" she asked. "Mom?" I thought about it. About Emily's lies. Her voice on the stand, her last photo in the obituary. "No," I said finally. "Hate would keep me there. I've spent enough time in cages." Sarah nodded slowly. "She wasn't well, you know." Toward the end, she'd sit by the window and cry. I think she knew what she'd done. Maybe she did. Maybe that was her prison. For a long time, we said nothing. Just two people sitting in the wreckage of years, trying to rebuild something that had never been allowed to grow. When she finally leaned her head on my shoulder, I closed my eyes. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight of my life shift from sorrow to something almost bearable. Almost? Do you want to meet them? She asked softly. Meet who? My kids, she said. Your grandkids. The words hit me like light breaking through clouds. Grandkids, I repeated, barely breathing. She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen on her face. Ben's 7. Lily's 5. They're shy, but... She hesitated. They've seen your picture. I told them you were gone. Not dead, just gone. I didn't know how else to explain it. She walked to the hallway and called out, Kids, come here for a second. Two small faces peeked around the corner, curious, cautious. The boy clutched a toy car, the girl a stuffed rabbit. Ben, Lily, she said gently. This is my dad. The boy frowned. Your dad? Sarah nodded. He was away for a long time, but he's home now. They came closer, hesitant but brave. Lily climbed onto the couch beside me, holding out her rabbit. Do you like horses? She asked suddenly. The question nearly broke me. I smiled through tears. I do, I said. I love them. Me too. She beamed. Ben looked up at me. Mom says you fix things. Used to, I said softly. But I guess I'm still trying. He nodded like that made perfect sense. When Sarah saw me laugh, really laugh, she covered her mouth and cried quietly. You sound the same, she whispered. I reached out and touched her hand. You do too. The kids ran to the backyard after that, shouting about fireflies. Sarah and I sat at the window watching them. The night hummed with the same sounds I used to hear when she was small. Laughter, the creak of the swing, the faint buzz of summer. Thank you for seeing me, I said. I almost didn't, she admitted. But I had to know if you were real. I am, I said softly. Finally, she leaned closer, voice trembling. I missed you every day, even when I thought I didn't. I couldn't speak. I just squeezed her hand and whispered, Me too, baby. Me too. Outside, the fireflies blinked like tiny lights of forgiveness. For the first time, the darkness didn't feel like prison. It felt like home. People think release is the end of the story, that the door opens, and the pain stays behind those bars. But that's not how it works. Freedom isn't a sunrise, it's a ghost. It follows you, breathes behind you, and whispers every time you try to sleep. 30 years. It's been a year since I left Green River. I rent a small apartment by the Ohio River now, where the nights are long and the water glows orange under the bridge lights. Some evenings I sit out on the balcony and listen to the traffic hum above, each car a reminder that life kept going without me. The papers still write my name sometimes. Exonerated man rebuilds life after decades in prison. They call me resilient. I don't feel resilient. I feel hollow in ways I can't explain. Ellen visits once a week. She always brings a file folder. She can't stop fighting even after she won. The governor signed your compensation order, she said last month, smiling faintly. You'll get something for the years they took. Money? I asked. What's that buyback, Ellen? My 20s? My daughter's childhood? She looked down. No, she whispered. But it buys you time now. To choose how to live. I thanked her, though we both knew it wasn't enough. Nothing ever would be. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night expecting the clang of doors, the shouts, the keys. The silence feels heavier than noise ever did. I'll turn on the radio just to remind myself I'm not back there. And yet, sometimes I miss it, the routine, the certainty, the grim safety of knowing exactly where I'd be each day. Freedom isn't what I remembered. It's too big, too loud, and I'm too small for it now. It was Ellen who told me about Emily's case. The same courthouse that buried me had tried her posthumously. Her estate was fined, her record amended to show perjury in a criminal proceeding. Justice, they called it. Do you want to go to the hearing? Ellen had asked before it happened. No, I said. The dead can't stand trial, and the living don't need to watch it. But the day the ruling came, I sat by the river anyway. The wind smelled like rain, and I imagined Emily standing in that old courtroom again, tears in her eyes, telling another version of the story. This time, the truth. Maybe she had believed her own lies in the end. Maybe guilt rotted her from the inside. I'll never know, Sarah called that night. They mentioned her on the news, she said quietly. They said she perjured herself. Yeah, I said. They did. I don't know how to feel, she whispered. Neither do I admitted. There was a pause, soft and heavy. Then she said, Ben keeps asking when Grandpa's coming back to visit. He drew another horse, I laughed, the sound breaking mid-breath. Tell him soon. After we hung up, I sat there in the dark thinking about Emily, the woman I once loved, the woman who destroyed me, the woman who gave me Sarah, and I realized something that startled me. Underneath the anger, the grief, the wasted time, there was pity, because even after everything she did, I was still the one who walked out into the light. She never did. This morning I walked down to the river again. The sun was low, orange on the water, same as the day I was released. I brought a folding chair, my Bible, and the small box that holds everything I've kept. Ray's matchstick cross, Sarah's crayon drawing, and my mother's rosary. I sat there for hours watching the current move. It never stops, never hesitates. The river just carries everything away. Grief, truth, time. Sometimes I wonder who I might have been if that day in 1989 had gone differently. Would I still have the garage? Would Emily and I have grown old together? Would Sarah have remembered me as her hero instead of a shadow she had to forgive? Maybe. But that life's gone now, washed out by years no one can return. And yet sitting here I can feel something like peace. Not the kind you pray for, the kind you earn by surviving what should have killed you. When I look at the world now, I don't see justice. I see balance. I see that lies fall apart eventually, no matter how well they're built. Ellen says she's writing a book about my case. She asked me for a quote to end it. I told her, truth doesn't set you free. It just lets you see the cage you've been living in. I stood up, stretched, and looked out across the water one last time. The wind carried the faint laughter of children somewhere in the distance. Maybe Sarah's, maybe not. It didn't matter. It sounded like life. As I turned to leave, I whispered to the river, to Ray, to my mother, to Emily, to every piece of me that was buried but not gone. I'm still here, and for the first time in 30 years, that felt like enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.